Welcome to the Kalya Perera YouTube channel. So, my guest today is a very influential personality in Sri Lankan political, cultural, and intellectual landscape. So, we don't need an introduction about him. It's none other than Dr. Sarath Amunugama. And we had several discussion in Sinhala in our channel. So we both agreed that it is important to repeat this discussion in English medium, because it's in my way, with such a important intellectual the experience to talk to Dr. Sarath Amunugama. But for those who are interested in Sri Lanka and work in English, he's no stranger. He has written extensively about his own experience, and perhaps most of what we are going to discuss maybe in his written works. But I think still it is important to present in this conversation form. Welcome to the program, Dr. Amunugama, and it's my pleasure to have this discussion with you. So as I did in the Sinhala version, I would like to ask you to recollect on your Perera experience, so that could be considered as a kind of turning point in your social encounter. And because the 1950s in Perera is not an ordinary place. Yes. It's a very special place, and the personalities who were there is very special. And I think, can you shall we start?
Yes. Well, I entered Perera University in 1957.
Yeah.
That is just
one year after
the social revolution of 1956. Actually, it's even closer than that, because those days the entrance examination was held at the end of that year. Mm-hmm. So really we sat for the examination in 1956. Yeah. That is only a few months after Mr. Bandaranaike's victory. Right. So in a sense, like Rushdie called some people midnight children.
Actually, it's wonderful that I exactly was thinking of asking you about,
So we are like the children of 1956.
Yeah.
It's a phrase that has now come into circulation. So it is not only the political environment, but also I think the social and economic environment that we have to analyze when we think of those days at Perera University. Of course, the idea of a residential university, also in very beautiful surroundings, has always been the dream of academics in Sri Lanka. We had a good university, the Colombo University, but we were affiliated really to the London University. So the degree was given from the London University.
So that was before 1942?
Before 1942.
Yeah.
So then after that, we didn't have our own residential university. Residential in the sense that the students did not reside within that campus. So, and this first thing we have to remember is that this came after the Korean War and the rubber boom.
Right.
When the country had surplus reserves, because we were one of the biggest rubber producers in the world and we had a very good market. There were other things later, we can go into the rubber rice deal, but at that time we can take for granted that the government had a good surplus.
Right.
That is how we undertook the Galloy scheme, and also the Perera University, and also the free education. All those three.
It's a massive construction project, in the standard of those days. Yeah.
Huge construction in an idyllic city setting with the Mahavali flowing through. So those were, in a sense, the investments made when we had a surplus.
Right.
So at that time they did not spare anything to have one of these beautiful campuses. Then secondly, it was very much modelled on the Oxford-Cambridge style, and in fact the first Vice Chancellor was Sir Ivor Jennings. He was here and he became the right-hand man of Mr. D.S.N. Naik, because as you know the Salisbury Commission and all those constitutional drafts, though they were adopted by the British, the actual writing, the texting of it was all done locally. So it was Sir Ivor Jennings who actually drafted it. And then he was brought in as the Vice Chancellor. The importance of that is that no other Vice Chancellor since then has had such a direct and close contact with the head of the government. D.S.N. Naik and he were the best of friends. So it was modelled on that, but even at that time we have to remember that the idea of the university was not entirely Western, because there was a very strong department of Oriental Studies, there was a very strong department of archaeology and Asian history. We had people like Professor Panavitarna, then Mr. Hemachandra, Dr. Ray, Dr. Rai, who later came to Vidyalanka, first class professors. So, and Professor Lebroy. So, the idea was this would be a meeting place of two cultures, the Oriental culture and the Western, not only a meeting place but the best of both cultures. So that was the dream.
And just to disturb, even the architecture represent this
the Puranaru period
combination.
And the Bodgul Vihara and all that. So it was a wonderful environment. The second factor was that the number of entrants were comparatively small. I mean, can you imagine, Nirmal, that every student in his final year had his own room. By the time we went, two had to use a single room, but our predecessors had a room for themselves. But that meant that the collegiate,
I think at the beginning it was something like 900 students altogether.
Now our intake, the arts intake was only 250 students. So, and that came after interviews, not only the written paper but also interviews. So it was an idyllic situation, not only the physical situation but all the historical situation, because before that it was, you could say, entirely Western or more Western values were dominant, and after that those values were supplanted by a different set of values, whether you call them Oriental values or that's a different story, but a different set of values. But this was the time when both sets of values were at play to the benefit of that of the culture. So people used to call it Peradeniya culture, Sarath Chandra culture, New Sinhala, various things. But when people of different interests live together, and also I can remember the club, the university faculty club, and all these people in the evenings they would discuss things, play badminton, all that sort of thing, and it was a corporate entity. The classical idea of the university as a corporate entity was replicated here. It was not there before, it was not there afterwards. So this was a wonderful period. So that is, now the question you ask is, now what is the contribution it made to politics, what is the contribution it made to culture?
Actually, the interesting thing is that when you look at, I mean, you painted a very nice picture about the Peradeniya at the beginning, but there are contrasting views, I mean, some people may criticize, particularly I would like to, I have a, some passionate, attachment to Gunadasa Amarasekara's views, although I'm his critic, but he was part of this Peradeniya circus, but later on, so he began to criticize, the so-called Peradeniya school and so on, and also very critical about Ivor Jennings's heritage and all that. But no one would reject that the Peradeniya made a very huge impact on Sri Lankan social, political, cultural, intellectual evolution.
Yes.
And as an education institute, so I think I mean it's universally accepted that it would be could be compared with any good university in the world.
In the world, yes.
Right. So can you give a kind of background of the intellectual circumstances, the kind of intellectual circumstances that you encountered in mid particularly after 1956, it's very
so before that I want to add one more thing. While we are talking of the campus and the staff and all that, we also have to add another factor, the students, the undergraduates and graduates, because then they spread out throughout the country.
Right.
So that what they learned within those 3 years in the case of a general degree, 4 years in the case of a special degree, was very quickly dissipated, was sent throughout the country, because at that time virtually anybody who came out of Perera or Colombo could at least get a job as a teacher. It was the main organization which provided teachers, trained teachers, because in addition to that there were also education faculty and teaching of principals and within the campus, the education section. So it was also the feeder of thinking throughout the country.
Right.
So there was the university, which was like a hatchery. You hatch chickens.
Yeah.
So those chickens go all over the country.
Right.
So you have the staff, you have the location, and you also have the students who are very important. And that was a time you can, I think you were senior to your, when people in a village thought that a graduate when he comes to school, school as a teacher, is an important person. That is there in our literature, Gunadasa's literature, in the type of early Sinhala films, where the graduate, especially I think Vasantha Obesekara's films, the young man who comes from the university, then problems he has, then he gets involved with the Mudalali's daughter and that sort of thing. So that was a culture. And so we have to think of all those categories. So the word I can use is confluence. That is when rivers, streams come, and that each has its own. One may be very cool water, one may be hotter, one may come from the hills, one may come from the plains, but all together, they all come together. It's almost symbolic, like the Mahaveli. Mahaveli, some of it comes from the hill country, some from. So it was a confluence of ideas, and I think lot of, not only here but in India also, many of the journals, many of the articles, many of the themes are on this idea of confluence, different streams coming together. So from that we can get a entry into this situation. Well, till I think about 1960, the language of instruction was English. Even if you were in the Sinhala department, you could answer on the Kausilumina or Pujavali or anything, but the answers could be written in English. In Sinhala department it evolved, but certainly the Pali and Sanskrit departments, the language of transaction was English. Translation from Sanskrit into English.
Just out of my curiosity, I mean, in addition to the main question that I raised, I mean, there are a lot of students maybe coming from rural areas, right? So how do you assess, I mean, you came from Trinity, so where English education is, no need to question about it.
Education.
But there were students who came from ordinary rural background. How was their English?
Now, actually, they didn't come from very rural schools. They came from central schools. I think
because just let me disturb a little bit. I'm asking you, I mean, as a university teacher who is, I mean, in our university after so many years, I know the level of students who are coming here, even those who are somewhat familiar with English. I think, when you compare the intellectual standard at that time, I think ordinary knowledge of English may not be
Very poor,
enough.
very poor.
So you have to have a high. That's why I'm asking.
You're referring to a very important
Yeah.
aspect. Because the free education scheme and the education reforms envisage three things. One is universal free education. The second was the central college, central school system. And number three, this is what has not been underlined by anybody. The Kannangara reforms envisaged the medium of instruction to be English.
Right.
So the central schools, now we are talking of free education, that everybody is praising. We are talking of central schools. But nobody is talking about the third prong of the Kannangara reforms. Conveniently, they have forgotten that those three were coming together.
Right.
So Kannangara's idea was, you have the central school with a boarding,
Right.
with scholarships, then the feeder schools are all the village schools, then you had the examination, and all the bright children from grade 7 say, the state takes over, not education.
Right.
This boy or girl is taken by the state, brought into the hall of residence in the central college, and taught in English, and then comes to the university.
Right.
That whether it's good or bad is a different thing. There was a debate, but that was a composite thing.
So bottom line is that when they come to the university, so they are qualified to be a good undergraduate student at a institute like a Perera University.
Then there is another sociological fact which I think nobody knows, but I can divulge now. At that time, for the Kannangara reforms, they adopted a novel policy. Each cabinet minister was asked, in your area, you set up a central college.
Right.
You are the patron.
Right.
So Dudley Srilanka put up Tholangamu. MD Banda had Poromadulla.
Right.
Nugavela had Nugavela Central. Then Bandaranayak had Veyangoda Central. Like that, each cabinet, and then they were educated people. Then one Inayaka had Maho Central. So they all were foster parents of these central colleges. So originally there may have been, I don't know, about 20 or 30 central colleges. Each had a foster parent in the highest politician of the land. And most of those people, they selected principals, hand-selected principals who could give a type of education that was given in the public schools. So those boys who came from those schools, and especially the girls, they got on very well. Only problem is that some of them may have preferred to go into the, because you had the Western subjects, the social sciences and the Oriental sciences, different faculties. So there may be a disproportionate number going there. But if you take people like W.S. Karunaratne, Siri Gunasinghe, all the people who taught in Singapore, Sugatapala Silva, I mean, they were as good in their Western languages as anyone in the, they were very, very fluent. So, but they were also very fluent in your own language. So that was the model, I would say, not only in Sri Lanka, but even in India. If you read Nehru, for example, Nehru's image of what an Indian should be was that they should be bilingual, they should be open to what Gandhi and Tagore said, that the windows of my mansion, the windows of my house is open. But I am not blown away by those winds, but I allow the winds to come in. So that, I think Tagore said that, no? So that was the philosophy. But that philosophy is now under challenge even in India. It's here everywhere. So other thing, of course, was that technology was not at a premium. That is also another factor. Today, if you look at it, if you ask a young man or young parent even, his idea is, I must send my child to either Moratuwa or to the engineering faculty or some medical faculty. Choices become very clear. No? So at that time, that was not so, because those technical sections were not developed. It's only later that even the engineering faculty at Moratuwa came. That time people had to go to the technical college, which was at Maradana. So they didn't have a academic degree, but they were engineers who went to irrigation department, and all these were all Maradana Technical College graduates.
Yeah.
So that was the system.
Right. So I want to come back to that point, particularly the, I mean, as you mentioned, you are a child of 56, in a certain way. Well, so that one of the allegations on the 56 is that the 56 culture, the 56 attitude, and also the language policy that was introduced after the 56 the victory sort of ruined that bilingual culture, I mean, that you explained as existed in Perera. So that's English medium. I don't know, we have to come back to that. But can you explain, because the Perera in 1950s, so you said that you came 1957, so that's immediately after
the revolution of 56, within
revolution, and there might have been a lot of discussions about the meaning of this. I mean, Wickramasinghe has claimed, said that famously this Bamunukule has been defeated.
Not only Wickramasinghe, even Sarath Chandra.
Right.
Because there was the countervailing influence also of the Indian independence movement.
Right.
Now, Sarath Chandra, for example, he was a India field.
Right.
He was a great lover of India because of the music and drama and philosophy and everything. So, on one side there was the Western tradition, but very strong demand for indigenization at that time. Now, even if you take, say, George Keat, now he has indigenized art. Now, look at this painting, my paintings. So, or drama, of cinema. So, they wanted international standards, but something distinctively Sri Lankan. They didn't want just to follow the English play or English film or English novel. Based on, with knowledge of that, they wanted to create something of their own. Now, this is not analyzed by anybody. Little bit has been done by J.B. Disanayake. This is shown in the use of language. How you use the Sinhala language. And also don't forget, language changes quite a lot due to the mass media. Now, at that time, the newspapers were coming in, Sinhala newspapers, then radio, there was no television, but there was a simplification of language. It was very interesting because now some of the Howler people were in Lankadweep, Hubert Hubert Disanayake and everybody. So they started using some of the Hela words in the mass media. Some of those words we are using even now. So through the mass media, through universities, through mass culture, the language was evolving. Now, I don't think anybody has analyzed the evolution of the language. Now, in that, Perera played a very important role, partly because their hero was Martin Wickramasinghe. Martin Wickramasinghe has to be given a lot of credit because he is the one who started writing in a new type of language. If you look at Gamperaliya and the trilogy and all these other novels, that language is quite different from the language of W. Silva and Devasiri. That is highly Sanskritized W. Silva. Devasiri also very sort of difficult, what you call Pandita language, to show off that you knew the language. But here simple communication became the important thing, and then following Martin Wickramasinghe, actually next was Gunadasa Amarasekara, because Sarath Chandra and Sidhu Gunasinghe and all started writing novels later. Gunadasa Amarasekara, in my mind, made a tremendous contribution, because even today, if you look back, the real person who has evolved a very beautiful, subtle language in literature is Gunadasa Amarasekara. Others may come close to him or not, that's different. Others are experimenting, doing various things, they get some credit. But to evolve a new Sinhala language for literature, particularly for novels and short stories, I don't think, in my private opinion, nobody can beat Gundas. I don't know whether you agree with my...
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, politically, I'm maybe critical of him, but as a literary person...
As a literary person who creates his own language.
Well, now, even for his strongest, the political critiques, and I think I know that a lot of people that, who admire him, I mean, he very critical about his political views, but so that's so I want to highlight a keyword that you are using, indigenization.
Yes.
So that's very important. So the need for indigenization was highlighted at that time. But what kind of indigenization? So you already mentioned that the intellectual contributions of Sarath Chandra, Wickramasinghe, Amarasekara and so on are completely different from their predecessors, W. Silva and Devasiri and so on. So it's not that those days there was a discussion of what is the authentic Sinhala Buddhist culture. So that was a theme that appeared again and again and again until recently in the Jatika Chintana discourse. So how do you relate that, the discourse of authenticity? One of the major issues after independence, that after gaining political independence, so how do we order our post-colonial, post-independent society, right? And so where do we borrow what's the heritage that we have to protect?
Now that is the very, very important subject. That is the main theme when you look at this cultural affairs, because anyway you have to look at the social and political environment in which language evolves. Language doesn't evolve by itself. Now even if you look at our ancient history, if you literature, if you look at Kausi Lumina, if you look at Puja Valiya, all those, to a large extent, it is influenced by the intellectual thinking of that time. So the social structure, the social thinking works on the language. That is inevitable. So this is the time when through mass media, through population growth, through education, the Sinhala language, and after all, language is only a vehicle of experience, and the Sinhala experience was beginning to form. So that is why that experience is linked to the confluence. How do we absorb the different influences that come onto the Sinhala person? Right. That is, you have your own traditional Sinhala literature, you have strong Buddhist tradition, there's Buddhist literature, then also there is the folk tradition. Even people like Gananath Obesekara and all that earlier, they started writing a lot about folk poetry, things like that. Folk tradition, very strong. Then the Western tradition, mostly the English tradition, but also later when people went to France and this and that, more of the, and pursued by Martin Wickramasinghe, the Russian novel, the Russian short story, Chekhov, all that. So that is one thing. That is perhaps after Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa, because those are the areas when our culture was influenced very much by the South Asian, the states. Now after that, the biggest influence came about this time, when English language, Indian experience, then our indigenous forms were all transformed. That is why if you look at what you call symbolic, authentic productions at that time, you can think of Lester James Peary's cinema, then Sarath Chandra drama, Gundas Amarasinghe and Martin Wickramasinghe novels and literature, Sri Gunasinghe poetry, then George Keith and all the art. So in all these different forms.
And also in architecture.
Very much like Baba later on. So in all the common thread is that they are trying to make use of local conditions. And best is in architecture, because for the first time, the open windows, the high ceilings, that was not only Sri Lankan but also the Dutch and Portuguese influence architecture. So it is a mix. All modern cultures are a mix.
Right.
It is not a shame to say that your culture is a mixed culture.
Yeah.
So that is where the problem arises.
Yeah.
That people feel that having a mixed culture is something bad. That item can be good or bad. That's a different matter.
Yeah.
But the concept of confluence, the concept of various influences, is a good one and a radical one. Now, if you take Latin American poetry, Latin American now literature, a lot depends on Spanish literature, and the indigenous literature all mixed together.
Right. So you entered into a very important you sort of created a very interesting platform, and so if I put the question in this way, I mean, yes, 1956 is all about the politically speaking. I think as the famous slogan goes, Sangaveda Guru Govikam Karu. If you forget Govikam Karu, particularly Sangaveda Guru, so they mainly, and also notaries, and it's all about when you are looking at at a class analysis of 1956, it's all about a kind of rural middle class who are mainly Sinhala speaking, monolingual social class. So perhaps don't you think that the kind of society that they imagine in their political thinking is somewhat different from the kind of society that the people like Sarath Chandra, Martin, although Martin Vikramasinghe studied overseas, but he is a very cosmopolitan man.
Yes. Oh,
right?
Very much.
And
he is leading.
Yeah. Don't you think that there's a kind of I mean, when they wanted to make Sinhala the state official language, I mean, we understand what they wanted. So they wanted to sort of rectify the injustices faced by the indigenous, the Sinhala language and so on. That's true. But there was now the society has changed. Right? So, that's why what was imagined by Kannangara, as you said, right, important, but the Peradeniya had a kind of thinking which would cater to this kind of need. But the dominant thinking of 56 revolution, don't you think that there's a tension between these two imaginations?
Very much a tension, because one thing we don't factor in normally is that we were one of the earliest countries to get universal adult suffrage. From 1936.
That's very important.
From 1936, every Sri Lankan citizen, man and woman, women only a few years after they got it in the UK, they had universal suffrage. So that means from time to time, we can even see it in the last elections. The vast mass of people begin to use this as a weapon not a weapon in a bad sense, as a means, let us say.
Let's say as a tool.
To their frustrations and their idea of a better world, idea of a more just and equitable world, they can use the vote for that. So that long period when we use the vote.
So, also, just to disturb you, so the emergence of the term, this Podujana Yugaya, it's a maybe
it's the same thing. That people are beginning to, whether that will lead to chaos or whether it will lead to, that's a different story. That's a different matter. We should not even raise that issue because they think you're privileged and you're. That's not what I'm saying. But now you have this problem or opportunity, I don't know, that the demographic factor and also we had a situation where, now that is where Peradeniya comes in, there was an ideology in this country of equity and what is called fairness. That they must use now. That was largely due to the left. Now recently I read an article and an analysis of the contribution by the Indian left in India.
Right.
True enough, they did not make a big impact politically. They did not win seats.
Right.
But they said, number one, the left created another ideology
Right.
in the country.
Correct.
That was not a feudal ideology.
Yeah.
So the influence of the left is much bigger
Than-
than that of the numbers who went to parliament or won the village committee or something.
Even the UMP after 1956 has to embrace
Has
that
to embrace
ideology.
that.
Yeah.
So the ideology.
Yeah.
So Perera was a fountain of that ideology.
So you should not forget the fact that it was J.R. Javardhana, leader of the UMP, who gave Sri Lankan the republic as the name of socialist.
Yes. Because that's a very important fact.
Yeah.
All these people who went to the schools as teachers after getting a normal degree, they may not have been outstanding students.
Yeah.
But every year 1,000, 2,000 people spread out with the ideological knowledge.
I would like to give you said that this vast number of students that
went out
from Perera. I mean, my own Sinhala teacher.
Yes.
So who teach Sinhala at the Prince of Wales? Where I did my O level and A level.
Yeah.
So we had a nice TV program recently. Now he's around 83 or so.
Yeah.
Interestingly, he was one who he did a general degree with Pali, Sinhala and economics from Perera.
Right.
I mean, his knowledge of literature was wonderful.
Exactly.
Right?
He inspires.
And so, I mean, I can't imagine, this.
Actually, we are created by these teachers.
Yeah.
If we didn't meet those teachers who came from Perera, maybe we won't be what we are today.
Right.
So we have to owe that ideology that what is happening now is not the best.
Right.
It's not the karma.
Right.
That you can socially intervene and change things came from Perera.
Right.
That is very, very important.
Yeah.
Because that was, whether you are a UNPA or anybody, that student who was there, who was going out, felt there is another way of looking at things.
Right.
Which if he remained in the village, he would not have got.
Yeah.
So one is ideology. Second is an alternate organization.
Right.
The left, meeting, exchanging letters, having secret meetings. You are a candidate member, you are not a real member. Then you have to go and do this, you have to sell so many papers. I also was a candidate member.
Okay.
So we know. Immediately you are not welcome. No, you may be a professor, but you have to join a local and then you have to sell papers and all that. So that organization. And third is that the feeling that you have to unionize.
Yeah.
Right? That you can't just protest, but you have a teachers union, a nurses union. So three contributions of the left. One is that ideology, alternate ideology is possible. Secondly, you have to unionize for that. And thirdly, that this is a alternate vision of the world.
Right.
So that came from our university system.
No, I think I think we have come to the end of the program. I think what you mentioned is very. It's also a kind of new to me, and it gives you a kind of new way to look at the political contribution of Perera.
Even education. How the role of education.
Yeah. No, it is politically important because. When you compare the student politics nowadays and the university politics nowadays, you won't see a kind of active political environment, comparable to what we have now, those days. But the significance. But I think, the most of the people who leave the university today, they may not be following the same ideas that, they propagate in street demonstration and all that. But the fact that you said that those who passed out from the university, and so they sort of disseminate a particular kind of social ethos, norms.
It is what they say. It is right to protest. It is not wrong to protest. It is not wrong to say that this is an unjust order. So even the UNP type of fellow who went from the university was tolerant of that.
Yeah.
So that was a very, very big thing. And now the best example, even to conclude our discussion, is Nirmal Karunatilaka.
Right. Okay.
He was deeply committed to politics in the Perera University.
Right.
Then he has never visited Mathale electorate.
Right.
He was taken by Bandaranayaka and asked to contest Mathale. He beat Bandaranayaka, who was number 2 to Bandaranayaka.
Right.
So that is the use of, that is the role of Perera University.
So, do you have any, insights as to how this university culture changed?
Yes.
Because you have experience and you are
is
very
because,
active. You have very active social life.
Because
And
all of those people felt that you can be anti-establishment.
Right.
Now, say that some of our literature also you get that. The young boy who goes to the university. Now he is not worried by the Mudalali or the Radalaya or anybody. Basically, he says, no, I am also a power in my village. I will teach the poor children. I will teach children of other castes. I am not bothered about these things, So he stands as another, okay, one may be one light, but there is another light in the village coming from this guy. Because he has learnt, learnt all this in the university, he has seen the demonstrations, though he may be not 100% active there, his mentality is okay, give a chance, you have a right to speak.
So let me tell you a story. I mean, he's a well-known writer. I don't know whether you're familiar with the name. His name is Vipulaheva Valimuni. So he was a popular writer in 1980s. So I remember. So he wrote an article. I think maybe in 82 or so. To the Lake House published this tabloid newspaper Yaun Janata, edited by Devasiri Gamage. And the title, he had this very interesting. I still remember the title. It's about the transformation of the university system. Ranmalu Pokunata Velmalu Paminima.
Right.
How do you translate it? The arrival of
a different type of fish.
yes. Right. So we equate the old system, Perera University as a kind of goldfish thing, and then right. And so that means that he refers to the situation where, particularly with the establishment of 2 new universities, Vidyodaya and Vidyalankara, it was a kind of new generation. Right?
That's the slogan. It's a right to rebel. It's a right to rebel.
And
maybe in literature, maybe in culture, maybe in politics. But it is not against your religion or against your society to rebel. Rebel, not to go and kill somebody, but have different ideas.
But that, don't you think that, well, I mean, politically I support that this the emergence of mass university education, and but at the same time we should not forget the fact that it contributed to the weakening of this high standard that for example Perera University maintained. And
I think Nirmal, that is the fault of the faculty.
Right.
Pardon me for saying.
Okay.
Because in any university, in any department, finally it will be about 5 or 10 or 20 people who are really the university people.
Right.
Others are passengers who come there, study and get a job and go away. But every good professor has about 20-30 Golyas.
Right.
That is our old system. Even the Pandit, had this Golya. So now when I went, I can say I was the Golya of Sarath Chandra. I was a Golya of Tambaya. I was a Golya of Garnato Bese. So then we interacted so much. We read everything he writes. We go for his plays. We go for discussions. We go field work with him. So we can never create a mass of intellectuals. But any university can create around its faculty a coterie, a group of people who carry that idea. Right now, take all of us, because we were brought into a circle by others. But I don't see our professors in the universities, I'm not blaming only this, even other institutions, where there are leaders who debate who are not scared to debate with students, who are not scared to lose a debate to a student, he can write an essay against your essay. So what's wrong? There's nothing wrong. That is a university. No?
Right.
Now today what has happened, in my little knowledge, that guy who can emerge from that thing, you or me, when we were in university, sometimes we are cut down by the faculty. We are not allowed. We are lucky because our professors, either the bright fellow, let's educate, let's allow him to study. I think you go and read this book or you go to this university for your post degree. That is not that. Today, I may be wrong, but we need the intellectual leaders must allow others to grow, must create younger intellectuals, create an intellectual world. That's what, even at old age, I think that is what we should be all doing.
So, what really went wrong? Where? I mean, I think looking at Perera, it's a wonderful experiment.
Yes.
And I mean, when you say that, the intellectual culture at that time, was so vibrant and, right?
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, I think so then the others who led the university life in other universities in 60s and 70s, so, the products of this Perera culture, right? But, something went wrong. How was it?
That I have no clear answer, but one is of course the sheer numbers.
Right.
If you are a residential university, there is an optimum number that can work there. It may be very popular to say, okay, bring another 5,000 people, or they can do by mail and all that. But finally, the idea of a university is, if you are in residence, you interact with your professors, that's an intellectual journey,
Right.
The 4 years of your life that you can never recreate again.
Yeah.
So I had an extra life like tortoise of 1 year. So 5 years of my life. Still, if somebody asks me what is the best piece, that is the piece. So we have to, we have done everything but not created that type of intellectual and teacher in this country.
So I would like to connect this discussion, to end the discussion. Maybe good to end our discussion, the kind of discussion about the university system, particularly need to reform it in the early 1970s, particularly after 71. There was under United Front government, so there was I think, it proved to be a major blow, particularly to humanities and social science faculties, right? I think, do you think that, perhaps,
But Nirmal, now look at what Anura has done, Anura Dissanayake.
Okay.
A wonderful thing,
Right.
to get from 3%
Yeah.
to 47%.
Right.
Through your brains,
Yeah.
through your organization, through the people who came from there. I'm not talking only of him,
Right.
that whole group.
Right.
They have achieved a miracle
Right.
with few resources.
Right.
So that potentiality is there,
Yeah.
but we are not creating it.
Right.
So, but one good thing that this group NPP has done is that they are going in the right direction to absorb more and more people. Our politics has been to reject people. Now here they are trying to bring more people and listen and be modest. So far they have done extremely well, I must say, because that is real creativity. Now that is real political creativity. If you can bring your party from 3% to 47%, you can communicate these things and get new people to support you. Well, that is good.
Yeah, so that's, one might say that, that's a kind of, so we
of our university system.
So that also kind of is a kind of outcome of this massive social transformation, the social revolution that that started after.
That's a very good book by Nepal, V.S. Nepal.
Okay.
His title is about India. He called A Million Mutinies Now.
Right.
He says in countries like India and Sri Lanka, we must protest, we must mutiny.
Yeah.
You can't listen to everything and say this is right. No, a million mutinies in your workplace, in your writings, in your this thing, you have to question. And say there's nothing wrong in questioning. Nothing wrong in rebelling not in the sense of going and killing somebody else, not like that. but having different ideas.
Yeah.
So, a university system, I think, all in all in Sri Lanka, we have not done too badly in the sense that those three things I mentioned, that there's room for protest, there's room for different ideologies, there's room for organization, and there is room for a different vision. So, if a university can create that, I think that's, there are a lot of faults, but still we can't be pessimistic.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Amunugama. I think so. We had a very important, the discussion, particularly, we discussed about the evolution of Perera University and the experience in the golden era of the higher education in the modern higher education in Sri Lanka. So I think so we continue this discussion in Sinhala, but at the same time I promise you to have another episode in English. And thank you for listening to us, and thank you very much, Dr. Sarath Amunugama, for joining Kalya Perera YouTube channel. Thank you.